It had been nearly 8 decades since anyone in the small town of Harriston, Louisiana, spoke openly about what happened in the white 2-story house at the edge of Willow Creek Road. Yet even now, locals lowered their voices when passing by it, as if the walls might still be listening. It wasn't the kind of place parents warned their kids about. It was worse, the kind they pretended never existed. Because in the summer of 1947, a seemingly ordinary married couple, Robert and Elaine Whitaker, vanished from their home without a sound. No struggle, no broken glass, no hurried footprints in the dirt. Their car was left in the garage, keys in the dish by the door, and their only child, Daniel Whitaker, was the last person to see them alive. But you already know this isn't just another missing persons case, because 60 years later, when a cold case investigator reopened the dusty file, she spotted a detail buried in the old photographs, small, almost insignificant, yet powerful enough to destroy the official story and unravel a truth so deeply buried it had taken a lifetime to surface. Before we unravel that truth, we have to return to where it started. July 1947, Harriston, Louisiana. The summer heat sat heavy on the air like a weight, the kind that clung to your lungs and drifted through every open door. Harriston was a quiet place, sugarcane fields stretching for miles, the slow hum of cicadas rising in the afternoon, and streets covered in gritty dust kicked up by the occasional passing truck. People knew each other here. They knew routines, habits, footsteps, voices, which is why the Whitakers' sudden silence struck everyone like a crack in the world. Their house, a weather-worn white home with a tin roof faded to dull gray, sat a mile past the last streetlight. Robert, 41, was an accountant in a lumber mill down by the river. Elaine, 38, did sewing work for the parish church. And Daniel, 22, was the pride of the neighborhood, a college engineering student in Baton Rouge and the first Whitaker to ever get that far. To most folks, they were a model family, quiet, polite, the type who kept to themselves but never caused trouble, the kind of family everyone trusts without needing reasons. That's why when July 4th approached, people noticed the Whitakers seemed off. Not fighting, not sick, just unsettled, a little distant. On the evening of July 3rd, their lights burned longer than usual. Neighbors later swore they heard something, maybe a door slamming, maybe something heavy hitting the floor, but the distant rumble of a passing storm swallowed the sound before anyone could make sense of it. Rain came shortly after midnight, warm and thin, tapping against the tin roof until the whole street blurred under its whisper.
By morning, the Whitaker place was silent. Curtains drawn, house locked tight. At 7 a.m., the milkman found yesterday's bottles still waiting on the porch, untouched, sweating in the heat. He set the new bottles beside them and hesitated. Something felt wrong, but he tried to ignore it. People slept late sometimes. People forgot things. By 9 a.m., one of Elaine's sewing clients walked up the porch steps to return a bag of fabric. She knocked, waited, knocked harder. Nothing. She circled around to the back door, also locked. The kitchen window was closed, curtains pulled, not even a shadow inside. By 11 a.m., Harriston was buzzing with whispers. No one saw them leave. Did they tell you they were taking a trip? They'd never leave their milk out. Relatives arrived around noon, calling their names, banging on doors that were still locked from the inside. Sweat ran down their backs in the oppressive heat as they checked windows, garage doors, every possible entrance. Still nothing. That was when someone finally went to the sheriff. Sheriff Walter Dumont, a steady man with tired eyes and a reputation for fairness, arrived at the Whitaker house shortly after 2 o'clock. His deputy followed behind, both men stepping into the yard as neighbors hovered nervously at the fence line. The grass was damp from the night's rain. A few shallow footprints, too smudged to read, marked the soft dirt by the walkway. Yesterday's milk was now room temperature. The front door stood locked, untouched, the windows sealed. The garage held Robert's black Ford sedan, thick with dust, exactly where it had been the day before. Dumont knocked 3 times. Nothing. The house swallowed the sound. The deputy checked the back door, locked from the inside. No pry marks, no scratches on the frames. Every entry point sealed as if the couple had simply evaporated between the walls. Then, as Dumont was turning away from the porch, the front door creaked open, slowly, quietly, and Daniel Whitaker stepped into the doorway. His hair was uncombed, shirt wrinkled, eyes heavy like he hadn't slept. He blinked against the sun and rubbed his face as if waking from a long nap. "I've been here all morning," he said flatly. "Mom and Dad left early yesterday. They went to a cabin near Lake Marston with some friends of my father's." Dumont asked for names. Daniel hesitated. I don't remember their last name," he answered. "Dad handled that." The sheriff exchanged a look with his deputy. Something felt off. Daniel stepped aside reluctantly, letting them in. The living room was tidy, too tidy. 2 coffee cups sat cold on the dining table, untouched since yesterday. A newspaper lay half open on the kitchen counter. The house smelled faintly of smoke, not thick or fresh, but like something had recently burned. Dumont walked the hall, checking each room. All windows locked from inside, beds smoothed and made, closets full, suitcases untouched, Elaine's jewelry box untouched. Not a sign the couple had packed or left voluntarily. Dumont felt the first prickling of unease. When he returned to the living room, Daniel sat stiffly on the couch, hands folded, staring at the floor. He looked wrong, calm in a way no one should be when their parents vanish. Dumont pressed him for details, but every answer was vague, incomplete, foggy around the edges. Afterwards, the sheriff stepped outside to write his initial notes. His pen hesitated more than once, the feeling in his gut refusing to settle. The Whitakers were gone, and nothing in that house made sense. By sunset, the official report would say, "Missing persons, cause undetermined." But even as Dumont walked back to his patrol car, dust and light gathering at his feet, he felt it lingering, the quiet, heavy wrongness of a house holding its breath. A house hiding something. A house waiting.
Sheriff Walter Dumont returned to his office that evening with a gnawing pressure under his ribs, a feeling he hadn't been able to shake since stepping out of the Whitaker house. Harriston wasn't the kind of place where people vanished, not couples, not without someone seeing something, hearing something, feeling a shift in the air. He sat down heavily at his desk, the oscillating fan rattling in the corner, pushing warm air around the room. He opened the thin manila file labeled Whitaker, Robert and Elaine, missing, and spread the day's findings across the desk. Daniel's story didn't fit. Nothing about it fit. The supposed friends who picked his parents up? No names, no descriptions, no records at the Lake Marston cabins, no cabin registered under any Whitaker or anyone connected to them. The Whitakers' Ford was still cold in the garage, its tires sunk exactly where they'd been sitting, no signs of it moving recently. And Elaine's sewing shop confirmed she'd been preparing orders due the next morning. She hadn't packed a thing. No mention of a trip. No one saw Robert at the mill making preparations either. It was as if the couple had simply disappeared right after their lights went out that night. Dumont leaned back and stared at the ceiling fan turning lazily overhead. Something was wrong, something he couldn't put his finger on yet, but he intended to find it. He reopened the file and underlined a line he'd already scribbled twice. No evidence of voluntary departure. The next morning, before sunrise burned through the bedroom windows of Harriston, the sheriff gathered deputies and volunteers at the parish station yard. Word had spread fast. There would be a search around Lake Marston, the supposed destination the Whitakers had left for. Locals brought their flat-bottom boats, dogs, old spotlights. They stood around a large map spread across a Dodge patrol car hood, while Dumont traced search sectors with a red pencil. West Banks first, North Edge by noon. We sweep every foot of shoreline. The convoy moved out, rattling along the narrow swamp roads,
dust trailing behind. The air grew dense with the scent of mud and water lilies as they neared the lake. When the boat slid in, the surface was dark and glassy, a mirror of the low gray sky. Tall reeds choked the shoreline, shadows shifting between them. The sheriff rode in the lead boat with 2 deputies and an older hunter who knew these waters better than anyone. He pointed out rotted logging trails that once carried trucks but had since been claimed by weeds.
Through the long morning hours, they scanned the banks, probing mud with long poles. Dog teams barked through the underbrush. But by midday, they'd found nothing. Not a tire track, not a footprint, not a scrap from a cabin. And by sunset, the entire north and west side were cleared. No Whitakers. No cabin. Nothing at all. Standing at the water's edge, Dumont watched the orange light smear across the lake. The wind rustled through the reeds, almost whispering. This place swallowed things. Time, debris, secrets. But Robert and Elaine weren't here. He felt certain of that. The following day, search teams pushed into deeper territory. Water rescue units dragged the lake bottom. Road patrols questioned passing drivers. Still nothing. Then, mid-morning on the 3rd day, as mist clung low over the water, a radio crackled across a deputy's belt. "Sheriff, we've got something." A small boat had drifted near the western shore, where reeds grew thick as a wall, and something dark had caught in the grass. When Dumont's boat reached the spot, he saw it immediately. A medium-sized leather handbag, mud-caked but intact, wedged between roots, like it had been placed gently rather than thrown. No one touched it until photographs were taken. Only then did a deputy lift it carefully into a tray. Inside they found a small wallet, a lipstick tube with a broken cap, a set of metal keys attached to a wooden tag carved with W, a few paper bills, and 3 business cards belonging to Robert Whitaker. The bag was unmistakably Elaine's, but Dumont didn't focus on the contents, he focused on the mud. It was fresh. Too fresh. And only the edges of the purse were wet. The inside was dry, meaning it hadn't been floating long, meaning it hadn't drifted from the center of the lake, meaning someone had placed it here. But yesterday morning, this exact spot had already been swept. Nothing had been there. Someone returned. Someone wanted the search team to find this. Later, back at the parish lab, results confirmed Dumont's suspicion. Soil samples matched the western bank. The handbag showed no sign of water saturation, no theft, no damage, just placed, recently, beside the lake. That afternoon in the sheriff's recorder log, the following line was written in red ink. First physical evidence identified. Possible criminal activity. The Whitaker case was no longer just a missing persons matter. It had shifted. It was now officially categorized as suspicious. The next morning, Dumont brought Daniel back in. The second interview. This time, the young man seemed more guarded, answering questions with long pauses and vague generalities. Every detail he gave unraveled under basic scrutiny. What color were the suitcases your parents took? Brown? Maybe blue? Where's the note they left? I threw it out, I guess. Who drove them? A friend. I don't remember. What kind of car? Gray. Maybe blue? Dumont scribbled, watching Daniel's eyes drop each time a question grew too specific. The sheriff could feel the truth tightening around him like a storm about to break. But no matter how many inconsistencies Daniel's story carried, there was still no proof. No crime scene, no body, no direct witness. And the law required more than suspicion. When Daniel left the station that day, Dumont watched him walk across the street, head low, posture stiff. The sheriff pressed his palm against the cool window pane. Something had happened in that house. He felt it in his bones. But until the evidence spoke, he couldn't force the truth out of silence. 3 weeks passed. Search efforts dwindled.
The lake returned to stillness. And without new leads, pressure mounted from parish officials to close the file. He wrote the final words with a heaviness in his chest. Disappearance, undetermined. The Whitaker case was placed into storage, its pages still smelling faintly of lake water and ash. Across the parish, life moved on. People forgot. The house was sold. Daniel left Louisiana. But Sheriff Dumont never forgot the feeling he had walking out of that square white house. The feeling that something inside those walls had been frozen in time, hiding the answer he had failed to uncover. And 60 years later, long after everyone involved had passed on, that same house would finally reveal what it had been holding. All it needed was someone who knew where to look.
For more than half a century, the Whitaker case lay dormant, packed into a thin folder inside a metal cabinet in the Louisiana State Archives. Clerks checked its box only during routine inventory, sliding it back into place each time without reading a single line. The label on the front slowly faded, the ink turning from black to gray, then to pale silver. Whitaker, Robert and Elaine, missing persons, 1947. Status, undetermined. Decades passed. Roads were paved, the old lumber mill changed hands twice, and the Whitaker house passed from owner to owner, its walls repainted, its floors refinished, its fireplace used to warm holiday gatherings of families who knew nothing about the past. And the only person who ever doubted the official story, Sheriff Walter Dumont, took that doubt with him to his grave in 1972. His private notes, whatever he'd written in the moments when duty and instinct warred inside him, were never found. Daniel Whitaker left Louisiana, eventually settling in Texas, later drifting to Oklahoma. No marriage, no children, a quiet life, ending with a quiet death in 1982. When he passed, the last living witness to the night his parents disappeared was gone. By the time the year 2005 arrived, the Whitakers were no more than a footnote in a forgotten file. Until the cold case unit opened. The Louisiana State Police launched the statewide initiative that year, backed by federal funds. Its mission: digitize old records, apply modern forensic science where none existed before, and re-examine every suspicious disappearance predating 1950. Investigator Megan Crowell, 29, joined the task force with a reputation for being relentless. She'd rebuild cases from scraps of evidence before, turning faded memories and lost documents into answers families had waited for. She wasn't one to be intimidated by messy files or stories too decayed to make sense. She worked methodically, labeling, sorting, scanning. Some files were thick, filled with witness statements and evidence logs. Others were nearly empty, a few yellowed pages in a single black and white photo. That's what caught her eye. The Whitaker file sat thin and forgotten among hundreds of others. Something about its sparseness made her pause. Too few details for a double disappearance. Too neat. Too quick. She slid the folder onto her desk, sat down, and began reading. The case summary matched what history remembered. Couple gone without trace, no forced entry, no signs of struggle. House neat, car untouched, son present but unhelpful. Then she saw a line handwritten on the back of the final report, almost lost to time. Something's not right, but can't prove it. Sheriff Walter Dumont's private note. It wasn't part of the official record. Someone had scribbled it there after the report was typed. Megan felt the hair on her arms rise. She moved to the old photographs, black and white images taken inside the Whitaker home. The overturned coffee table, the dark stain on the rug, the fireplace, the grainy shadows in the corners. Then she noticed something strange. The diagram in the report placed the stain near the middle of the room, but the photo clearly showed the stain near the wall under the window. An inconsistency, not definitive but troubling. She checked the fireplace image next.
The ash, photographed in 1947, looked unusually pale, almost white, not the typical dark ash from wood burning. She zoomed in, noticing flecks of something lighter mixed in. But the lab report from 1947 dismissed it as plaster, lime, or ceramic fragments. Nothing concerning. Still, Megan had worked enough cases to know. Ash told stories, and white ash, especially in quantities shown in the picture, was rare. Her eyes drifted to a margin note written in blue ink on the lab copy. Item destroyed. W. Duval. Destroyed? By whose authority? No corresponding order existed, and the handwriting didn't match Dumont's signature on other documents. She flipped to the end of the report. No trace of the evidence. No explanation. No chain of custody logs. It all felt wrong. She closed the folder and stared at it for a long moment before writing the case on her personal list. Priority review. Possible irregularities. 3 days later, she contacted the State Archives property officer, requesting any physical evidence tied to File 47B. The officer hesitated. They'd recently flagged that box for potential deterioration during inventory. When the box arrived, Megan opened it under sterile lights. The smell of old dust and damp paper drifted out. Inside were sealed cloth bags, some torn from age, labels written in fading ink, rug sample, ash sample, FP, metal fragments, porcelain shards. But some bags were missing entirely, specifically those referencing the fireplace cavity. She carefully lifted each bag, checking signatures. Dumont's name appeared repeatedly, but the pen type and handwriting varied enough to raise her suspicion. Then she froze. Something inside one of the bags rattled faintly, metal scraping cloth. It hadn't been cataloged in the official record. She spread the contents onto a sterile tray. A rusted brass 12-gauge shotgun shell rolled out, stamped faintly, Remington. The primer was blackened, the base scorched as if exposed to extreme heat. There was no mention of a shell casing in the 1947 evidence list, none. Yet here it was, tucked away in a bag Dumont supposedly sealed. Megan noted the black streak etched across the rim. Lab technicians later confirmed what she suspected. The residue contained traces of human protein. Something violent had happened inside the Whitaker house. The shell belonged to a shotgun registered to Robert Whitaker during the war. But if the shell was fired, where was the gun? Where was the body? Why had it been hidden? Who moved evidence? And most importantly, why was it never included in the official findings? Megan leaned back in her chair, heart pounding. She felt it now, as clear as the humid Louisiana evening pressing against her office window. This wasn't a disappearance. It was a crime scene. A buried one, cleaned up, rewritten, stripped of truth. And someone, decades ago, had helped bury it. She signed a formal request. Reopen investigation, Whitaker case. That night, the file sat alone on her desk, its yellowed pages illuminated under the desk lamp. For the first time in 60 years, the silence inside that old white house was beginning to crack.
The approval to reopen the Whitaker case came faster than Megan expected. By the next morning, she had official authorization to pursue any remaining physical evidence connected to the home on Willow Creek Road. And with it came a court-issued warrant, not for a search of the house as it existed now, but for an excavation of the fireplace itself. The current homeowners, an elderly couple who'd bought the house in the late 1980s, allowed the investigation with a mixture of curiosity and dread. They'd never known the full story behind the property, only the whispered rumors. The wife remembered once finding strange white powder under a loose tile during chimney repairs. They had scraped it up and replaced the brickwork, thinking nothing of it. But Megan knew better. She had seen that powder in the 1947 photos. She'd read Dumont's uneasy margins. She'd studied the pale ash in the box. Ash didn't stay white like that unless something unusual had burned there.
Early on a gray, humid morning, the cold case forensic team arrived, a van with portable lab equipment parked at the curb. Tarps were spread across the living room floor, plastic covered the furniture. The old fireplace, modernized over the years, was now stripped down to its bones. The lead forensic technician reviewed the plan one more time. Remove surface tile, document all layers, collect ash, soil, brick, fiber. Stop immediately if organic fragments appear. Everyone signed. Everyone held their breath. As the first layer of tile was pried up, brittle mortar cracked in dull snaps. Dust rose into thin beams of morning light. Beneath the tile was a layer of fine, pale ash mixed with small specks of something shiny. Not soot, not typical. The technician scooped a sample with a steel spatula, holding it under bright light. Tiny flakes gleamed back, smooth, bright, metallic, flattened like something melted and re-solidified. "That's not wood ash," he murmured. They bagged the sample, marked it, logged it. A few inches deeper, the second layer appeared, thicker, more compact, as if compressed by weight or intentional packing. When the spatula scraped across it, something tapped against the metal, a soft clink. Everyone froze. With tweezers, the technician lifted a small white fragment, no bigger than a fingernail, porous, irregular, roughly curved. Megan leaned in, her pulse rising in her throat. "Possible ceramic?" an assistant asked quietly. "No," the specialist answered. "Ceramic doesn't look like this." He tested its reaction with a small droplet of phosphate reagent. The faint color shift was unmistakable. Bone. Human bone. A hush fell over the room. Not fear, but the thick stillness of truth finally surfacing. More careful scraping revealed 3 additional fragments, similar in size, similar in structure. They were placed in small vials, labeled one by one. The farther they dug, the more irregularities they found. Mortar lines that didn't match the original construction, uneven patches, a thin, blackened wire embedded in one layer of concrete. Then, reaching almost 8 inches deep into the cavity, they found a mass of cement unlike the rest, rough, hastily applied, cracked as if it had been sealed in a hurry. "This filled after the fact," the geologist said. "Mid-20th century mix, definitely not original to the house." Inside this block lay charred fibers, faded but intact, fragments of cloth, possibly linen, possibly cotton, burned but not fully disintegrated. The bottom layer of the hearth was removed intact and sealed in a crate weighing nearly 50 pounds. Whatever it held might answer the question no one had dared ask in 1947. Was someone burned here?
Back in Baton Rouge, Megan presented the findings to the Cold Case Unit Command Team and the State Prosecutor's Office. The room went still as she laid out each piece. Human bone identified as Elaine. A fired shotgun shell belonging to Robert. Unexplained ash inconsistencies. Missing evidence from the 1947 file. Conflicting signatures on official documents. After 60 years, the case officially shifted from missing persons to homicide. The prosecutor issued directives for expanded investigation, including search authorization for all Whitaker-associated properties and access to sealed parish archives. That night, Megan sat alone in her dim-lit office, the reopened file in front of her. Rain tapped softly against the window, echoing the storm from 1947, as if history itself were repeating. She wrote in her log, "Elaine Whitaker, identified. Homicide confirmed. Investigation expanded." The silence of nearly 6 decades had broken. A story long buried in ash was beginning to breathe again. If Elaine's remains were hidden in the hearth, then the most logical assumption was that Robert shared the same fate. Yet no evidence of a second body had surfaced.
No bone fragments matching him, no DNA, no traces of a second adult in the material collected. Did he die elsewhere? Did he flee? Did someone make him disappear too? Or did he kill Elaine? Megan refused to settle on any theory. Not yet. The pieces were too scattered, too tangled with 60 years of dust and silence. She shifted her focus to the person who would have known the truth better than anyone, Daniel Whitaker. He was gone now, buried in Oklahoma in 1982, his death certificate listing heart failure at age 58. But the shadows around his life were still traceable. She began with his old records, school files, employment history, hospital records, anything that might reveal inconsistencies, patterns, or behavior that made sense in light of what they now knew. The early years showed nothing unusual, good grades, no arrests, but beginning in the 1960s, 2 decades after his parents vanished, there were entries of alcoholism, frequent relocations, and abrupt job changes. Notes from a psychiatric intake in 1969 described him as anxious, guarded, emotionally detached, with a history of nightmares and unexplained panic episodes. One line stood out. Patient avoids discussion of parents, becomes agitated when questioned. Another record from the 1970s hinted at violent outbursts, though they were never formally documented. A neighbor report from Amarillo, Texas, claimed he screamed at no one in particular at night and talked to shadows, but nothing ever came of it. Trauma, guilt, secrets, whatever weighed on him, it had followed him for decades. But trauma alone didn't prove anything. Megan needed more. She filed a request with the parish to unseal older documents from the 1940s, specifically those related to the sheriff's office internal communications. She suspected that Dumont's doubts had been deeper than the official record suggested. Maybe he had tried to raise concerns. Maybe someone had shut him down. The request took a week to process. During that week, forensic techs completed the analysis of the metallic fragments found in the hearth. They were melted lead and brass, consistent with ammunition. The burn pattern indicated they had been subjected to temperatures exceeding 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. A wood fire doesn't burn that hot, the lab analyst told her. Not even close. Someone used an accelerant, and they kept feeding the fire. This was deliberate. The report added that it would have taken hours to reach those temperatures using anything available in 1947. Hours. Hours of burning. Hours of intent. Even worse, the remaining fibers, those charred scraps pulled from beneath the concrete, belonged to clothing, women's clothing. Color long gone, but the weave suggested a cotton house dress, the kind Elaine wore around the home. Megan closed her eyes, imagining the scene. The Whitaker living room filled with smoke, someone tending the fire through the night, the house sealing in the smell, the heat, the horror, and then someone cleaning up before dawn, carefully, methodically, the kind of cleanup that suggested calm, composure, familiarity with the home, not a stranger. On the 8th day after reopening the case, the parish archives finally released Dumont's internal notes. The binder was cracked and fragile, its pages brittle. Megan wore cotton gloves as she flipped through each document. Routine case reports, patrol logs, correspondence about county budgets. And then, tucked between 2 unrelated letters, she found it. A handwritten note, unsigned on parish stationery. Additional evidence removed from scene before cataloging. Request denied for further forensic analysis. Orders from higher office. Someone had blocked Dumont, someone with authority above him. But who? The parish command structure from 1947 listed the chief deputy, W. Duval, the same name that appeared on the evidence destruction note Megan had seen earlier. But Chief Deputy Duval had died in 1959, leaving no written explanation for why he interfered. Did he know the Whitakers? Did he know Daniel? Did he orchestrate the cover-up, or did he protect someone else? She pulled Duval's personnel file. It revealed something unexpected. The Duval family and the Whitakers attended the same church. Their sons, including Daniel, had been in the same youth group. There were photos, grainy but clear, showing Daniel standing close to Duval's son Peter around age 15. They were friends. But the most important detail was in the back of the file. Emergency call logged 7347. Reported by house on Willow Creek Road. Caller hung up immediately. The address matched the Whitaker residence. The time was shortly after midnight, the night of the disappearance. Yet the report never made it into the official Whitaker case. It wasn't in Dumont's file. It was never investigated. Duval had logged it himself and then buried it. A call from inside the house, the night of the incident. Then silence. Megan's chest tightened. If Elaine was burned, if Robert was missing, who made the call? A chilling question formed the edges of her thoughts, one she wasn't ready to answer. The next step was clear. She needed to reconstruct the final night, step by step, movement by movement, every detail of the house. To do that, she needed someone still alive who had been present in 1947. There was almost no one left. Almost. She remembered a name in the witness list, Lydia Harper, age 89, still living in Harriston. She was the Whitakers' neighbor at the time, the one who claimed to have seen their lights burning unusually late. Megan drove to Harriston the next morning. The sky was overcast, the roads wet, as if the world itself were bracing for what was about to be spoken aloud after so many years. Lydia lived in a small home near the church. She opened the door with slow, deliberate movements, her pale eyes sharp with recognition when Megan showed her badge. "I've been expecting someone," she said quietly. "I always knew this day would come." She invited Megan into her modest living room. Knitted blankets, photographs of family, a shelf lined with porcelain birds. The air smelled faintly of lavender. Lydia sat down carefully and folded her hands in her lap. "You're here about Robert and Elaine," she whispered. "Yes." Lydia nodded slowly. "I was the last person to see them alive." The words hung in the air like a tremor. Megan leaned forward. "What did you see?" She exhaled shakily. "Not what. Who?" Her gaze lifted, trembling. It was their son. Daniel was the last one in that house with them. For a long moment, Megan didn't speak. The small living room felt suddenly tighter, the faint ticking of a porcelain clock filling the silence between them. Outside, a light drizzle tapped against the window, as if echoing the slow, steady beat of Lydia's trembling confession. "Please," Megan said gently, "tell me everything you remember." Lydia closed her eyes, inhaled slowly, and began. "It was July 3rd, hotter than usual, the kind of heat that makes the house feel alive, breathing in your ear. I'd opened all my windows to let the night air through. That's when I heard it." She paused, fingers curling around the arm of her chair. "At first, I thought it was just the storm rolling in, but then I heard a thud, heavy, like something falling. I looked out my window and saw a faint light flicker in the Whitakers' living room. The curtains were open a crack. You couldn't see much, but you could see shadows." "What kind of shadows?" Megan asked quietly. Lydia swallowed. "Shapes, movement, not normal movement, fast, sudden, like someone stumbling or being pulled." A cold draft seemed to slip across the room, raising goosebumps along Megan's arms. "Then," Lydia continued, voice cracking, "I heard shouting, a man's voice. It sounded like Robert at first, but not quite, not steady. It echoed in a way I'd never heard from him." "What was he saying?" "I couldn't tell. The wind was too loud. But I remember something else, something I tried to forget." She drew a shaky breath. "There were two figures at the window, one taller, one shorter. The taller one moved back, and then she pressed her lips together, reliving it. The smaller one collapsed. Collapsed? Fell? Yes, like someone had struck them or pushed them. Lydia's voice wavered. I didn't know what to do. I was alone. I didn't have a phone then. Robert and Elaine had the only one nearby. I told myself it was just an argument, that it wasn't my place. She looked down, shame welling in her gaze. But then the lights flicked off. Everything went dark. Not like someone turned them off, more like the house swallowed them. A long silence followed. What about Daniel? Megan asked, finally. Lydia's eyes slowly lifted. I saw him. Megan's pulse quickened. What do you mean you saw him? He stepped outside minutes after the shadows disappeared. The rain had just started. He came out the front door, stood under the porch light, and stared at the driveway like he was waiting for someone. He didn't look frightened. He didn't look upset. He looked hollow. Hollow? Empty, like something had been carved out of him. She rubbed her hands together as if trying to warm them. He stayed outside for a long while, then turned and went back inside. I never saw either of his parents again. When Lydia finished, she leaned back, exhausted, as if she'd opened a door she had nailed shut for 60 years. Megan sat motionless. Her mind was racing, her instincts blazing, her heart pounding.
If Lydia's memory was accurate, and something in the old woman's trembling voice told Megan it was, then Daniel hadn't been an innocent bystander, and he hadn't been a victim of trauma erupting decades later. He had been there. He had witnessed something, or caused something. "Why didn't you tell the sheriff?" Megan asked gently. "I did," whispered Lydia. "At least, I tried. Sheriff Dumont spoke to me, but before I could say anything meaningful, Chief Deputy Duval pulled him aside, told him I was mistaken and too far away to have seen anything." Her lips tightened in an old, bitter frown. "And Dumont believed him?" "No," Lydia said, shaking her head. "I know he didn't. He came back 2 days later, alone. He asked me again, but by then I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Of Daniel," she whispered. "He came to my door the morning after his parents disappeared, knocked 3 times, just stood there when I opened it, rain dripping off his hair. He didn't say a word, just stared at me with these cold, wet eyes. Then he walked away." A shiver rippled through Megan. "But you never saw him do anything violent?" Megan pressed. "No," said Lydia, "but sometimes you can feel a storm before it breaks." When Megan left the house, the drizzle had grown heavier, blurring the edges of the streetlights. She walked slowly to her car, replaying Lydia's every word. A thud, a collapse, shadows, Daniel standing outside watching the rain, a phone call at midnight, evidence burned in a fireplace, a cover-up from someone with authority. Piece by piece, the picture of that night was forming, but one part still refused to fall into place. Robert. Where was Robert? If Daniel killed his mother, did Robert interfere? Did father and son struggle? Did Robert flee the house? Did he die elsewhere? Or had Robert been killed first? The 12-gauge shell came back to her mind, fired, scorched, covered in human protein. She remembered the missing shotgun, Robert's own firearm registered during wartime. It had never been found. If that shotgun had been used inside the house, where was the blood? The walls in the 1947 photos showed no visible spatter, unless someone had cleaned it, or unless the shot was fired somewhere else entirely. As she reached her car, her phone buzzed. The caller ID read, "Forensic Lab, New Orleans." Megan answered instantly.
"We have results on the ash compound," the technician said. Her breath caught. "And?" "There are multiple layers of combustion: wood, textiles, accelerants, and small traces of a second DNA profile." Megan pressed a hand to the roof of her car as the rain poured harder. "A second profile?" she whispered. "Is it male?" "Possibly, but the DNA is degraded. We need more testing. It's faint, very faint, not enough to confirm identity yet." Megan closed her eyes. Could it be Robert? A pause. A deep, heavy pause. "It could be," the technician admitted, "but the degradation is severe. If he was burned, then not in the same manner, or not fully." Her breath hitched. There was more. "We also found something else," the technician continued. "In the deepest layer of ash, something metallic. We're sending a picture now." Her phone buzzed. A photo flashed across the screen. Megan's pulse stopped. It was a metal object, warped, scorched, but unmistakable. A belt buckle. Old, thick brass, stamped with initials. R.W. Robert Whitaker. He had been in that fireplace too, or near it, or dragged toward it, or... Her breath thinned. The story was collapsing into place, and what it revealed was worse than she imagined. She whispered into the phone. This wasn't one murder. This was two. The technician didn't answer. He didn't need to, because the truth had already taken shape. Both Whitakers had died in that house. Both had been burned. Both had been hidden. And only one man had walked out of that home alive. Daniel. But why? That question still hovered like a blade above the case. She knew the final piece of the puzzle lay not in the ash, but somewhere else, somewhere she hadn't looked yet. And the place she needed to go next was the attic of the Whitaker house.
Megan returned to the Whitaker house just after sunrise, the sky washed in pale gold. The air was cool, still carrying the scent of last night's rain. She'd been here countless times already, but today felt different. Today, she wasn't looking for clues. She was looking for the truth, the whole truth, that had gone untouched for nearly 60 years. The attic was her final unexplored space. The elderly homeowners had warned her that the door stuck sometimes, old timber, humidity. But when she pulled the cord to lower the ladder, it slipped open with surprising ease, as if the house itself wanted her inside. Dust puffed from the wooden steps as she climbed, flashlight cutting through the dim haze. The attic stretched long and narrow, the rafters creaking softly above her. Old trunks, storage bins, furniture wrapped in sheets, all normal. But Megan wasn't here for boxes or heirlooms. She was looking for something that belonged to the past, something that had survived the burn, the cleanup, the silence. The flashlight beam swept across the space until it hit something that made her stop. A long, rectangular outline in the dust, a place where something had once been and then moved recently. Her heartbeat quickened. She followed the faint drag marks across the attic floor until they stopped at the far wall. Beneath a pile of old holiday decorations lay a wooden trunk, dusty on top, but strangely clean around its handles, as if someone had touched it within the last decade. The homeowners hadn't been in the attic in years, they said so themselves, which meant these marks weren't theirs. She crouched beside the trunk, put on gloves, and gently lifted the lid. Inside was a small, leather-bound notebook. Old, cracked, the pages yellowed like parchment. The initials on the cover made her breath catch. D.W. Daniel Whitaker. She opened the first page carefully, afraid it might crumble. The handwriting was tight, precise, and deeply pressed, as if written by a young man who rarely let his hand tremble.
The first entry was dated August 1947, just a month after his parents vanished. Megan read slowly. "I have to write this down, even if no one ever reads it, especially if no one ever reads it. I can't keep this inside anymore. I don't sleep. I see them. I hear them every night." Her pulse thudded. Another entry. "I didn't mean for it to happen. We were arguing again. Dad grabbed the shotgun. Mom screamed. I tried to take it from him. It went off. She fell. I didn't know what to do. The light in the attic seemed to dim. Dad lunged at me. I hit him with the gun. I don't remember how many times. I only remember the blood and the way he looked at me when he fell." Megan felt her throat tighten.
"I panicked. I dragged them to the fireplace. I didn't think. I wasn't myself. I wasn't anything. I used the old kerosene. I tried to make it all disappear." The truth washed over her like cold water. Daniel had killed them, both of them, unintentionally at first, but then with fear, with panic, with an avalanche of emotion he could never escape afterward. There were dozens of entries, some coherent, some rambling. The later pages were filled with guilt, terror, and the slow unraveling of a man who had destroyed his own life at 22. One line stood out above all others. "I tried to call the sheriff. I wanted to confess, but when the operator connected, I saw what I'd done. I hung up. I couldn't speak." The midnight phone call, the one Duvall buried. The next entry dated 2 days later. "I told the neighbor I didn't know where they went. She didn't believe me. I saw it in her eyes." Lydia. Another entry. "Deputy Duvall came. He said he knew it was an accident. Said he'd help me if I helped him. He took things from the house, burned papers, hid the gun. He said he'd keep me out of prison if I kept quiet. I didn't know what else to do." Megan lowered the notebook, stunned. Duvall hadn't just interfered with the investigation. He orchestrated the cover-up. He shielded Daniel and buried evidence. He turned a double tragedy into a decades-long mystery, for reasons no document could ever fully explain. Was he protecting a young man he saw as vulnerable? Protecting the son of a friend? Protecting the reputation of the parish? Or was it something darker, something the dead deputy took to his grave? Megan turned the pages until the final entry, written in shaky, older handwriting, dated 1978, just a few years before Daniel's death. "I can't outrun it anymore. I dream of the fire. I hear them calling my name. I should have confessed. I should have paid for what I did. I was a coward, a scared kid who became a scared old man. The truth is here. If someone finds this someday, tell them I'm sorry." Megan closed the notebook, tears gathering at the edges of her vision. Decades of silence, decades of guilt, decades of a truth buried beneath ash, fear, and a deputy's misguided protection. Daniel hadn't been a monster. He had been a frightened son in a moment of chaos, a moment that spiraled into horror and then into a lifetime of torment. But intentional or not, 2 lives were ended, and the truth mattered. Back in Baton Rouge, the cold case unit gathered for the final briefing. Megan laid out the notebook, the forensic evidence, and the witness testimonies. She explained every step, every detail, every discovery. The room was silent when she finished. The chief investigator finally spoke. "Cause of death for both parents?" "Homicide," Megan said softly, "but accidental in nature for the initial event. Manslaughter for the second. And suspect? Deceased, Daniel Whitaker. And Deputy Duvall? Complicity in evidence tampering, obstruction, covering up a felony."
The chief nodded slowly. Case closed. Megan exhaled, the weight lifting, not fully, but enough. Justice, long delayed, had finally reached the Whitaker family. A few weeks later, Megan returned to Harriston. Lydia Harper sat on her porch when Megan walked up the path. "Well?" Lydia asked, voice trembling. Megan took her hand gently. "We know what happened. It wasn't your fault. You didn't imagine anything." The old woman's eyes glistened with relief. "Thank you," she whispered. Megan glanced at the white house down the road, the place where it all began, the place that had held its breath for 60 years. A breeze rustled the trees. For the first time, the house didn't feel heavy or haunted. It felt quiet. Finally quiet. She stepped back into her car, started the engine, and watched the town fade in her rearview mirror. The truth had finally come home. The Whitakers, at last, could rest. And the silence that swallowed a summer night in 1947 was finally broken. Forever. Case closed.